question I get so often through the years is, how did a Baptist minister get into sex? Most people don't even believe that Baptists have sex, let alone their ministers, except underwater. Now I'm getting a new question, and that is, how did a Baptist minister become a UU? And I say, I came home. This is where I was meant to be. I have always been curious and interested in religion and spirituality. And I use the term spirituality because that's always looking for meaning. Whenever you're asking for meaning in anything, that's a spiritual issue. Science doesn't give you meaning. Science just describes. And spirituality is, in a sense, any question would be a spiritual question that is being asked. When I was little, my parents didn't go to church. They didn't believe it. They felt that religion had gone awry and was totally irrelevant to this world. But they did believe that they were spiritual. But we did have a custom of going to church twice a year, Christmas Eve and Easter sunrise services out in some field. And my mom tells a story that in about the second grade, I started setting up a pulpit in our living room where I would preach and sing, much to their chagrin, I'm sure. But that interest and that curiousness about religion and spirituality has always remained with me. I've always been interested in sex. I didn't have anybody to ask questions when I was a kid. And so one time, I asked my parents about sex, a spiritual question. And my dad left the room, and my mom said to me, "Bill, you'll know." God will tell you. So I became a minister. And I still didn't get the divine revelation. In seminary, I learned all about the sinfulness of some sex. So then I decided to go into psychology, and I got a doctorate in psychology. And there I learned that the sickness parts of sex. So now I'm both sick and sinful. So then I became a sexologist, and I was saved. The first church that I served, which was the first Baptist church in Gloucester, Massachusetts, I began to hear stories about things that was going on sexually that I didn't even know existed. My good seminary education, my good doctoral program in psychology and counseling did not prepare me in any way for the kinds of issues that I faced in the congregational work I did, or community work that I did. And then about 5 years into the pastorate there, my young people asked me if they could have a sex education course. I was excited, I was scared, and I was challenged. I was excited because they were asking questions that when I was a kid, I didn't have anybody to ask. And I was scared because I didn't know what their parents would say. I didn't know what my congregation would say. I didn't know what the community would say. And I was challenged because I thought, could we have a sex education course where we wouldn't have to follow some party line? So I joined with two other clergy, the rabbi, who was my best friend there, and another Protestant minister, and we designed a 4-session course and said that maybe if, and among us we had about 60 kids, and said that if we would have them come with signed notes from their parents, that would kind of cover us in a way. So we did, we planned it, and the first night we had over 600 kids show up, all with signed notes from their parents. And so we had to go to the sanctuary of the largest of the 3 congregations to fit everybody in, and filled it. And I'll tell you, the kids were wonderful. They were so attentive, and they came back all 3 Sunday nights and asked the best questions, were the most attentive, and it was a very exciting thing. And then 6 weeks later, the Board of Education of Gloucester came to me and said, you know, we heard about this, it's all over town. We would like for you to do a course for the junior hires, and we'll give you the high school facilities to do it. And I said, as long as we can have their parents too. Because I really believe that parents should be just as involved in learning in the process as the kids. So we did. We had it. We had virtually every junior hire in Gloucester out, and their parents. And I even got one of the Catholic priests to work with us, and some of the other ministers who would. And then I also got a bunch of my classmates at BU to come in and work with me. So it really was an exciting experience. And then other communities around New England began asking me to come in and set up these little 4-session courses, which is all I knew. And but the thing I became really convinced about was that people, and I think especially people of faith, are really hungry to know about their sexuality and to be able to integrate it into their spirituality and their religious life. And so after I got my doctorate, I did do some teaching in both a Protestant seminary, the one I graduated from actually, and a Catholic seminary. And I really began to see how important this was, and my passion for religion and sexuality really was kindled in those experiences. And then I received a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania, which was an NIMH-granted program to spend a year doing the interface between religion and sexuality. And I stayed there for 28 years. It wasn't all in the postdoctoral year. They actually hired me. About 15 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. David Satcher, when he became Surgeon General, that's the country's doctor. When he became Surgeon General, he quickly discovered that a major public issue was human sexuality, with all the abuse, the treatment of women, the kinds of violence, sexual violence that was going on, the amount of STDs and STIs, and unplanned pregnancies among youth, really became an issue that was our country's issue. And so he brought together a group of people, some sexologists, some religionists. We had representatives from every denomination, and other stakeholders, and a large group of government people from the Department of Health and Human Services, where the Surgeon General works under. And we came together to see what he could do to address this issue, this public health issue. And it was amazing after a few days how we came together, even though we represented a broad spectrum of thinking and theology, how much we came together and said, you've got to do something. And we agreed that what he should do is put out a Surgeon General's call to action to promote sexual health and responsible sexual behavior. And it goes from top government down to family, including our religious organizations, our schools, our youth organizations, whatever. But it's a strategy for promoting sexual health and responsible sexual behavior. But he asked us an interesting question when we had developed this, and we were very excited about it. He said, well, now, what in the world could be the barriers to promoting sexual health and responsible sexual behavior? What barriers could there be? And number one, religion. Which really was a painful for me, because I'd given my life to studying religion and being a part of faith communities. And so I think that is where I began to learn some important lessons. And I'm going to call them lessons for all seasons as well as this season. First of all, as a culture, we are sexually ignorant. And we value ignorance. We don't want our kids to ask. And we're always afraid of what they're going to ask, and we don't even know whether we can answer them. And so there's this anxiety that continues to promote sexual ignorance, as if keeping them pure is going to save them. And unfortunately, in the church, we tend to value sexual ignorance and be very careful about it, and yet it's as important for the congregation to get into this discussion as well as for the youth. The second thing is that we are also sexually secretive. We don't really talk about sex at a very deep level. We don't share our fears, our concerns, our questions, our fantasies, our experiences, and we actually value not talking about this issue. And the third thing is that we're also, in a sense, sexually traumatized. And I think of our kids who get such mixed messages, positive and negative, from their family, from the church, from their school, from their peer group, from the media. It's just such a sea of mixed messages that they get. And one of the things that excited me about coming here was taking part in the OWL program, where our kids were really getting good information, good ways to talk about it, and hopefully communicated with their parents in terms of the kinds of lessons that we gave each week. But that's the curse, is the sexual ignorance, sexual secretiveness, and sexual trauma. And I'm going to give you just a simple, actually embarrassing story from my own experience. I was brought up in a grocery store. My parents were grocers. And we owned a little, family grocery store. It was before the era of supermarkets. We owned a family corner grocery store, and I started working for my dad and mom in the grocery store when I was in the 5th grade. And they taught me everything about the grocery business. I learned how to fix the lettuce and those fruits and vegetables and make them look nice. And I learned how to slice bologna and cheese and salami. And I learned how to give change, take change, and work at the counter. And I learned how to stock the shelves and put things right in their place, except for one thing. I could never touch the Kotex boxes. And in those days, they had brown paper around them with string. And I know exactly where they were. If I'm standing at the counter, they're right there on the top shelf so that kids couldn't reach them. Right there on the top shelf. And I used to, when nobody was in the store, I'd just sit there and I'd look at that, and it took on a real mysterious, kind of scary thing. And quite a few years ago, I was experiencing a bladder infection. And my urologist could not clear it up with antibiotics. So I was in the office one day, and he said, I'm going to do a cystoscopy, and that's where they take and put a cystoscope up your penis and look in your bladder and see what's going on. So he did this, and he found out what was going on, and he says, I know why the antibiotics didn't help, blah, blah. And so he was pulling out the cystoscope, and he says, now don't worry, which means worry. Don't worry. He said, there's going to be some blood, and just go to the store and get some sanitary napkins and wear them for a few days and you'll be fine. What? He says, just go to the store and get some sanitary napkins and wear them for a few days and you're going to be fine. I didn't know whether he was going to faint, throw up, pass out, or whether I could even get out of that office. And at the same time, I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking, Bill, you're in this field, you're so comfortable, you're freaking, you know? So I went to the local supermarket. And I'm walking along and I see feminine hygiene. And I wait until the aisle's empty. And I go down. There are hundreds. With wings, without wings, deodorized, non-deodorized, small, medium, large, thick, thin. I left. I walked out of the store. And I went back to my office. And Susan here and I shared the same office for many, many, many years. And one of the women in our office, who I had actually started the counseling service with, Carol Nettleton, and we were walking down to get some coffee, and I said, Carol, what does with wings mean? And she said, what are you talking about? So I told her the story, and she said, go back to the store and get stay free, no wings, non-deodorized, medium days, and you'll be fine. So I go back to the store, get my cart, wait until the aisle's empty, and I find stay free, no wings, medium days, non-deodorized. Put it in the thing. And then I go get some other stuff that I don't need. But then I get into a very anxious situation and think, what clerk am I going to take this stuff through? Who's going to be in front of me? Who's going to be behind me? And I'm getting really anxious. And my fantasy is I'm going to get up there and she's going to go, price check, stay free, medium days, non-deodorized, no wings, and totally humiliate me. She just passed it right through, didn't think a thing, put it in the bag, and I'll tell you, 1,000 pounds was taken off my shoulders. Now I go to the store and I can't help but not buy them. I've even tried other Nobody in our house has worn, these things for years and years and years, but I still buy them. And they've got always now, and anyway.
We could always use them in the back room.
I will fill them.
Yeah.
You can believe it. But anyway, I know that my father did not mean to traumatize me. I know that secretiveness was to keep me kind of pure. And it's interesting because I never had to buy them. We've got Kathy, we have a daughter. I was never asked to get these things. So that it really stayed a kind of a secretive thing, and I stayed ignorant in terms of getting rid of my fears, the mystery about it. So it can be something so simple in our messages to our kids that can have an effect, let alone when we get involved with abuse and with all kinds of things that are also traumatizing. So, what were my lessons from this? To me, if religion is a barrier to promoting sexual health and responsible sexual behavior, I think it also holds the answers and where we can be of help. I think that the Surgeon General was really helpful in teaching us and me that you can overcome ignorance with knowledge. You can overcome secretiveness with promoting communication. And you can overcome trauma by providing our kids with good knowledge, with positive views about sex, and with positive experiences, so that they can grow to be healthy sexual beings with responsible sexual behavior. That's why I love our OWL program, because I think we're really accomplishing something. Our kids here are the teachers of the kids in their community and of relatives and of schoolmates, and they really are becoming the teachers because they've got it. And what we need is to promote that within the congregation and with parents, so that our goal is that we can talk about this easily and that we can really support one another, and that we will have a healthier, more responsible society. That's the lessons for this season. It's interesting because this is a season of a lot of things. I mean, there's Hanukkah, and there's Kwanzaa, and there's the solstice, the winter solstice. I keep thinking nocturnal emission, and it's winter solstice. I asked Kathy this morning, I said, what is it that they're celebrating next week? And you can tell where my mind runs, But I think that, and then there's Christmas. And it's interesting, and I'm going to end here pretty soon. A lot of people are going to be celebrating Jesus, the birth of Jesus. Well, now, we don't know anything about Jesus much. I mean, we don't know anything about his birth. We don't know anything about his youth. We don't know anything about his early adulthood. There's very little that we really know, because he never wrote anything that we know of. And what was written by some people who know him 30 to 70 years later, and some people who said what people said about him. So, but there's one key in all of the teachings about the life of Jesus. He was talking, and a scribe, who was the religious scholar of the day, really liked what he was saying. So he turned to Jesus and he said, well, what would be the greatest commandment and law of everything? And this is in all three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are about him. And he said, and he called on his scriptures. He was Jewish. He was a good Jew. I don't think he'd be a Christian. He might be a Unitarian. But he said, and he pulled from his scriptures, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and he said, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. In other words, love God. There are 13 different views of God in the Bible alone. So which God? Well, for Jesus, God was love, and love is God. And so he was really teaching us the importance of love and relationships, and that's what it's all about. So in love, may we overcome our ignorance into knowledge. May we overcome our secretiveness into better communication. And may we overcome our trauma by providing good experiences, positive experiences, and positive information.